If you're tired of these promos, supporters get the podcast early and ad-free. Just go to donate.bogosity.tv for the links to sign up. Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of August 28, 2022, the podcast that goes wild when you speak French. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's expropriate the news of the bogus. On the one hand, we can see why YouTube would want to develop the Content ID system to get the copyright bullies off their case. But the problem, as we've seen repeatedly in the past, is that the system actually results in abuse, particularly of smaller and independently run channels. Now, a lawsuit headed by Grammy Award-winning musician Maria Schneider is accusing YouTube of operating a two-tier copyright system in which the entertainment cartels engage in fraud to stop smaller competition. According to the lawsuit, YouTube has been restricting access to the takedown tools available to the big cartels. YouTube claimed that doing so would only lead to abuse. Funny that, right as the lawsuit began calling for YouTube to offer the same tools to all artists, not just the big and powerful ones, all of a sudden the people demanding a better deal got accused of abuse themselves. One of the plaintiffs at the time, Pirate Monitor, allegedly engaged in a fraudulent campaign where they uploaded content themselves and then blamed YouTube for not shutting down the copyrighted content or letting them have access to Content ID. There are hairs to split here. On the one hand, we've seen this kind of fraudulent behavior from anti-piracy groups many times, where they complain of pirated material they uploaded themselves. On the other hand, it could have been a valid test of the system, creating channels YouTube had no reason to believe were affiliated, then uploading the content and seeing if YouTube would treat them the same as other copyrighted content the way their terms and conditions say they will. This is the key focus of YouTube's counterclaim, and they hope to prove the entire lawsuit frivolous on the basis of this activity. They filed a motion to dismiss, which failed not only from the infringement claims, but claims that YouTube removed copyright management information, or CMI, from the content. Unlike DRM, which prevents someone from merely watching content unless a number of measures are in place, CMI merely identifies the copyright holder and other relevant information about the work. Like DRM, CMI is protected by the DMCA. Removing it inhibits the ability of copyright holders to find and identify infringing copies of their work. So now YouTube is moving forward with their defense. Content ID is so powerful, they say, that it can quickly remove infringing content or prevent it from ever appearing. But if it's placed in the wrong hands, if anyone other than the great and the good can use it to protect their works, it could result in the censorship of legitimate content, allowing people to claim content that isn't theirs or even take revenue that rightly belongs to others. Yeah, wouldn't it be bad if that started happening? YouTube said, quote, plaintiffs complained that they have not been allowed access to Content ID, but dismissed plaintiff Pirate Monitor has clearly demonstrated why it cannot be trusted to use that tool properly. As set forth in YouTube's counterclaims, Pirate Monitor engaged in widespread abuse of the DMCA's notice and takedown process, going so far as to upload hundreds of videos to YouTube under false pretenses, only then to claim, through false DMCA notices, that those same videos were infringing. This was apparently a ruse to obtain access to Content ID, and when it failed, Pirate Monitor responded with this lawsuit. As I said, there are hairs to be split over it, but it hardly seems relevant given that they're no longer a plaintiff. But even if the court were to rule that Pirate Monitor was engaging in fraud rather than simply testing the system, it still raises two questions. Why should that reflect on every independent artist, and why shouldn't they have had access to it anyway without resorting to a ruse? Also, YouTube says, they're just wrong that they have no access to Content ID. There's a nice bit of kettle logic for you. They shouldn't be allowed access to Content ID because they'll abuse it. And anyway, they have access to it. YouTube is claiming a number of affirmative defenses, including failure to state a claim, DMCA safe harbor, fair use, contract provisions, estoppel, unclean hands, failure to mitigate, statute of limitations, and a lot of others. They spend a lot of time talking about Pirate Monitor. Quote, Pirate Monitor will be subject to the defenses of unclean hands and copyright misuse based on its fraudulent attempt to use copyrights, including those it did not even own, to leverage access to YouTube's proprietary systems. While Pirate Monitor has since dismissed its claims with prejudice and is now subject to counterclaims in this action, any other putative plaintiff could be subject to individualized defenses like these that could require considerable plaintiff-specific discovery and litigation. And they're asking for a bunch of stuff that doesn't really make sense. Quote, Pirate Monitor has failed to produce a single document in response to YouTube's discovery requests that seek, among other things, information regarding Pirate Monitor's corporate structure, identification of its agents and affiliates, its operations, its capitalization, and its observance of corporate formalities. Pirate Monitor has not even indicated if or when document production will start. Pirate Monitor is withholding the requested documentation in a further effort to conceal the facts regarding the misconduct about which YouTube complains, along with the identity of the individuals and entities involved. And remember, this is after Pirate Monitor dismissed its claims. And in case you're wondering why it matters that businesses form corporations to get their basic rights they should have as people anyway, quote, YouTube has not found corporate registration information for a Pirate Monitor LLC anywhere in the world, and Pirate Monitor has not provided any discovery in the question. Instead, it appears that Pirate Monitor is merely an unincorporated DBA. So? It's crazy! It's just page after page after page about someone who isn't even a defendant anymore. I mean, I get they have a counterclaim against them, but they're hardly even mentioning other plaintiffs. It just goes back to what we've always known. This is not about protecting artists. It was never about protecting artists. It was about having a special class of artists with privileges not enjoyed by others so that powerful cronies can profit and the little guy just doesn't have a chance. It'd be better off if we just did away with the whole thing. If you're looking for a way to support this channel, but you don't have any spare cash and you can't stand ads, you can do so by generating your own cryptocurrency. Use the links at the bottom of the description to follow the link to Odysee.com to listen to the podcast and see all of my YouTube videos as well. Just watching videos will produce cryptocurrency for the creator and yourself. And since Odysee is always monetized and never censored, you'll have no problem seeing all the videos from your favorite creators. You can also use the library credits you create at Odysee to tip creators and even purchase paid content. Earn library credits through various rewards, including daily view rewards and the number of shares and invites. And you can interact with creators in all sorts of ways, including like and dislike, comment, boost a post by supporting it, repost it, and share to other sites, all while earning crypto for the creator. Easily monetize yourself and your favorite creators using cryptocurrency, without advertising. Use the link below to visit this channel on Odysee.com and see many of your other favorites there as well. Alright, good news time. After 11 years of basically spewing carbon into the atmosphere for no reason other than panic, Japan is finally ready to restart nuclear power plants shut down in the wake of the Fukushima disaster that happened as a result of the 2011 earthquake and tsunami. They're now looking at restarting the fleet of idled reactors, including at the Onagawa plant where, as we covered, nothing went wrong even though it was closer to the earthquake's epicenter and got hit with a larger tidal wave, largely because they were Generation 2 reactors built over 10 years later with more modern safety features. Things hit ahead this summer, where the power crisis, spurred on in large part by the 1-2 punch of inflation and sanctions against Russia, has put the Japanese power grid under such a strain they're looking at the possibility of large-scale blackouts. Even Tokyo has seen major power issues during its worst heat wave in more than a century. Japan wants to have 7 reactors restarted by next summer, on top of the 10 that have already been brought back online in recent years. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said, quote, "Nuclear power and renewables are essential to proceed with the green transformation. Russia's invasion changed the global energy situation." Kishida instructed officials to consider extending the lifespan of existing reactors beyond the current maximum of 60 years, something that most of the Gen 2 reactors at least should be able to do easily. Japan is also looking at construction of new power plants, specifically looking at Generation 3 SMRs that can be mass-produced with passive safety features. Anything goes wrong, in the worst-case scenario, Reactors just stop working. No meltdowns, no radiation. The International Energy Agency has said that the world's nuclear capacity may have to double to achieve the mid-century carbon goals. Sadly, Sweden and Germany are cutting back on their nuclear programs, but it's nice to see some countries being a bit sane. Maybe, considering it's Japan taking these steps, the rest of the world may finally get the idea that it's time to move on from Fukushima.
If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv.
So there's an interesting update in the Elon Musk Twitter saga. Quick recap. Musk wanted to buy Twitter for $44 billion, based on at least 95% of Twitter's users being unique humans. Twitter had a snitfit saying they didn't want him to buy. Then it came out that it may be that as many as 20% of Twitter users are bots. So Musk said he wanted to back out of the deal or at least knock down the number, and now Twitter wants to force him to buy. Through it all, the claim that 20% of Twitter's users are bots has been ridiculed by the news media and censored by big tech as being an insane conspiracy theory. Now, it seems a whistleblower is saying it's true, detailing, quote, extreme, egregious deficiencies in its efforts to fight spam and bots. The complaint, filed with both the SEC and the DOJ as well as the FTC, comes from Twitter's former head of security, Peter Zatko. Zatko is a white hat hacker widely known and admired as Mudge. Among the most serious allegations he makes is the claim that Twitter violated the terms of an 11-year-old settlement with the FTC by falsely claiming it had a solid security plan. Zatko claims the servers were out of date and running software with known vulnerabilities. Even worse, Mudge claims they deliberately withheld vital security information. According to the disclosure document, quote, after Mudge had prepared comprehensive written materials to educate the board on his findings about the company's extensive security, privacy, and integrity problems, Mudge was instructed not to send them to the board of directors. Mudge witnessed senior executives engaging in deceitful and/or misleading communications affecting board members, users, and shareholders. In contrast, Mudge spent 2021 designing and implementing a long-term strategy to reform and address Twitter's privacy, security, and integrity vulnerabilities. On December 14, 2021, against Mudge's recommendation, CEO Agrawal explicitly instructed Mudge to provide documents which both of them knew to be false and misleading regarding vital information security matters to the Risk Committee of Twitter's board of directors. In January 2022, Mudge began working to document evidence of fraud. Twitter's chief compliance officer opened a fraud investigation based on Mudge's allegations. On January 18, CEO Agrawal lied about Mudge's efforts to rectify the previous month's fraud. Agrawal terminated Mudge the next day, January 19. Yes, the CEO deliberately misled the board. He also claims that poor security led to the hacking of accounts of high-profile users like Elon Musk, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump. And yes, Twitter lied about bots to Elon Musk. Zatko says that the company prioritized the growth of user accounts over reducing spam, despite efforts making for a worse user experience. Bonuses of as much as $10 million were tied to increases in daily users, little if any for cutting spam. Quote, Agrawal knows very well that Twitter executives are not incentivized to accurately detect or report total spam bots on the platform. Musk is correct. Twitter executives have little or no personal incentive to accurately detect or measure the prevalence of spam bots. In fact, Mudge learned deliberate ignorance was the norm against the executive leadership team. Mudge asked the head of site integrity what the underlying spam bot numbers were. Their response was, "We don't really know." The company could not even provide an accurate upper bound on the total number of spam bots on the platform. Senior management had no appetite to properly measure the prevalence of bot accounts. They were concerned that if accurate measurements ever became public, it would harm the image and valuation of the company. He said that Musk's suspicions were right on the money. Senior executives get bonuses not for cutting spam, but for growing users, and their metric is set up, quote, precisely to avoid having to honestly answer the very questions Mr. Musk raised. A more meaningful and honest answer to Mr. Musk's question would be trivial for Twitter to calculate, given that Twitter is already doing a decent job excluding spam bots and other worthless accounts from its calculation of minimum daily active users. But this number is likely to be meaningfully higher than 5%. And the fact is, they actively avoid counting them. Quote, Mudge attended every board of directors and relevant board subcommittee meeting in 2021, where he saw this strategy regularly deployed. Executives reported items, such as bot takedowns and other metrics, as raw numbers, without context, never in a more useful format, e.g., percentages with well-defined numerators and denominators that would permit board members to understand the overall prevalence of fake accounts. Agrawal's tweets and Twitter's previous blog posts misleadingly implied that Twitter employs proactive, sophisticated systems to measure and block spam bots. Mudge discovered the reality: mostly outdated, unmonitored, simple scripts, plus overworked, inefficient, understaffed, and reactive human teams. The scripts were largely unowned by any person or team, and their results were not tracked. Furthermore, no effort was made to compare costs to benefits of the scripts, nor approaches, nor their veracity. And he goes on to show that, quote, Agrawal's misrepresentations about spam bots are just the tip of the iceberg. Other serious allegations concern the Jan 6 attack, misleading regulators in multiple countries, and penetration by domestic and foreign intelligence operatives. Zatko, who was hired by former CEO Jack Dorsey in 2020 after a major hack, told the Washington Post, quote, I felt ethically bound. This is not a light step to take. Zatko was fired because he repeatedly pushed Twitter execs to address major security issues which pose a threat to, quote, users' personal information, to company shareholders, to national security, and to democracy. Okay, he got increasingly hyperbolic there, but maybe he has a point? Quote, I joined Twitter because it's a critical resource to the world. All news seems to be either from Twitter or goes to Twitter for coloring and context, and as such, it not only paints public opinion, it can change governments. Like suppressing information about a certain laptop that polls show, if the voters had known the truth about it, would have changed the results of the 2020 presidential election? The revelations come after trying and failing to get the information out any other way. Quote, this would never be my first step, but I believe I am still fulfilling my obligation to Jack and to users of the platform. I want to finish the job Jack brought me in for, which is to improve the place. Hopefully something gets done about this. In the meantime, if you're a Twitter user, take steps to protect your personal information and secure your account, which you should be doing anyway.
Do you have children, or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling, or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins, and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-age children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins.
And now it's time to aspirate this week's biggest bogon emitter. And this week it goes to Cleveland State University, although it really shouldn't be the only one, but it's the one we have information on. The remote learning and testing has led, according to an Ohio judge, to unconstitutional searches. During the pandemic, students weren't given a choice whether to take tests remotely, but a Zoom call is one thing. Scanning a student's entire room is something else entirely. Ostensibly done to prevent cheating on tests, something routinely done by many schools across the country since COVID hit, Judge J. Philip Calabrese of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Ohio ruled that it's not only an invasion of privacy, but an unlawful search in violation of the Fourth Amendment. It started when student Aaron Ogletree agreed to a room scan before a chemistry exam. Since there were others in his home, he took the test in his bedroom, where there were confidential documents in his room, including sensitive tax documents that couldn't be moved before the test. The scan recording was shared with other students. The judge ruled, governmental officials, lawfully in a public place, do not conduct unlawful searches simply by observing things in plain view. But the room scans peer behind walls and go where people otherwise would not, at least not without a warrant or an invitation. While cameras might be generally available and now commonly used, members of the public cannot use them to see into an office, house, or other place not publicly visible without the owner's consent. At the Fourth Amendment's very core lies the right of a man to retreat into his own home and there be free from unreasonable governmental intrusion. Consistent with established precedent, the court determines that plaintiff had an objectively reasonable expectation of privacy in his home and one that society recognizes as reasonable. The judge rejected the excuses the college gave about them being optional. At the time, the only classes allowed were remote. Other schools had done it, no excuse. And it was necessary to prevent cheating, which is the only interest the college had in scanning his room. But the judge ruled, defendant does not offer much argument or evidence to support the efficacy of room scans. Perhaps experience with room scans is too recent or not extensive enough to offer much in this regard. Whatever the case, a record of sporadic and discretionary use of room scans does not permit a finding that room scans are truly and uniquely effective at preserving test integrity. The court concludes that Mr. Ogletree's privacy interests in his home outweighs Cleveland State's interest in scanning his room. Accordingly, the court determines that Cleveland State's practice of conducting room scans is unreasonable under the Fourth Amendment. It's nice to see a judge acknowledge that slippery slope is not a fallacy. While room scans themselves could be considered relatively harmless, quoting the Supreme Court in Boyd v. United States, he ruled, "It may be that it is the obnoxious thing in its mildest and least repulsive form, but illegitimate and unconstitutional practices get their first footing in that way, namely, by silent approaches and slight deviations from legal modes of procedure." That's probably a good one to remember. So all of that makes Cleveland State University this week's biggest bogon emitter.
I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.bogosity.tv.
And now let's anglicize this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
And this week it goes pretty generally to attorneys. Not all of them, to be sure, but it's a widespread issue, especially among attorneys with big firms. One attorney it doesn't apply to is Alan Dershowitz, since he's the one letting us know about all this. He says that most reputable law firms are now prohibiting their lawyers from having anything to do with Donald Trump. Quote, "All big firm lawyers have told me that their firms won't let them do it. The firms won't let them go near any case involving Trump. These are firms that want to continue to have clients, and they know that if they represent Donald Trump, they'll lose a lot of clients." Dershowitz would know. He experienced it firsthand after he defended Trump in his second impeachment trial, which, despite resulting in Trump's acquittal, cost Dershowitz jobs and speaking engagements. Quote, "Everybody who has called me has shown reluctance to do it. They say their law firms won't let them do it, their husbands or wives won't let them do it, their children won't let them do it, their friends won't let them do it, even though they want to do it." It's such a shame that lawyers apparently haven't even educated their own families about the importance of the principles of justice and the Constitution. Sounds like they need to step up a bit there. If they can't even do that at home, what chance is there for the lay public at large? All of this is happening after the historically and legally unprecedented raid on Trump's Mar-a-Lago home in Florida, and it's spilling over into all sorts of indictments, including many over Jan 6. It's scary when you get the idea that certain people don't get representation. Everyone deserves representation. Neo-Nazis got representation. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg got representation. Jeffrey Dahmer got representation. As soon as you say someone shouldn't get representation, you no longer have a justice system. So all of that makes all these attorneys this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
Well, that wraps up this "Sometimes I Think About Having You Executed Just to See the Expression on Your Face" edition of the Bogosity Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support, and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Julian Assange. "Every time we witness an injustice and do not act, we train our character to be passive in its presence and thereby eventually lose all ability to defend ourselves and those we love." The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.
We live in a world where light bulbs connect to the internet, and recent attacks on them prove that your online security is under threat like never before. Not only your websites, but the internet-enabled devices you buy. And the biggest problem is weak passwords. That's why you need LastPass. LastPass allows you to randomly generate strong, unique passwords on the web and on your internet-enabled devices, all protected by one master password. LastPass sets up in minutes and gives you secure automatic logins throughout the web, synchronizing across all your browsers, all your computers, and even your mobile devices, at home, at work, or on the road. It even securely stores sensitive form data, including credit card numbers, backup sensitive documents, software licenses, Wi-Fi logins, and more. And with LastPass Premium, you can get these benefits on other applications, manage passwords for your entire family, and also get priority customer support. Sign up at password.bogosity.tv for a free month of LastPass Premium. Log in securely everywhere using the last password you'll ever have to remember. Go to password.bogosity.tv and get LastPass now.